All right, everyone. So, welcome to our lesson on teenage cognitive and moral development. So, our objectives are to analyze problems teenagers face with cognitive skills and explain moral development in teenagers. And if you would please take a look at the standards there as well. We have one vocab word, rationalization, which is when an individual tries to explain an often unpleasant behavior or emotion to preserve their self-esteem. And we'll explain that later on in the lesson. And then think about this. Have you ever felt a certain emotion or behavior and tried to explain it? Like maybe you were wondering why you felt sad or upset or angry. Natural reaction for people to try to, for humans to do is to try to explain why they're feeling a certain way they're feeling. And we'll begin to see the growth of this during the teenage years. And our central question, how do teenagers develop cognitively and morally? So the development of cognition. So patterns of thinking also change as teenagers develop. If you remember back to Jean Piaget, one of the periods that he refers to is the formal operations period. And this has a lot to do with the teenager adolescence time period. So 11 and 12-year-olds begin to think more abstractly. I should say begin and think, not, I'll try and change this for you. So it should say begin. So I guess I'm just trying to fix this for you. Begin to think. There we go. More abstractly. Starting when you're 11 or 12-year-old is when you begin to think more abstractly. The problem-solving capabilities expand during the teenage years as well, and teenagers are able to develop reasons to problems and try solutions. So if your car is making a weird noise, you might, pop the hood and say, what's making that noise? You may pull over somewhere and try and figure out, why that noise is happening. So teenagers begin to try to understand reasons why things are happening and then try their own solutions at it. So comprehension. So teenagers are not only able to solve abstract problems in science and math, which are the typical areas where abstract thinking comes into play, it can also relate to metaphors and analogies, understanding those, and they begin to understand ethics like right and wrong, phoniness when someone may be, acting phony with them, and also conformity, understanding, why people fit in society and the importance of maybe sometimes fitting in society. Introspection also begins to expand during the teenage years. So why am I feeling and acting the way that I am? Now, teenagers also begin to deal with overpowering emotional feelings. For example, a student who failed a test may believe that the reason they failed the test was because maybe they were worried about a date they were going on with someone later that weekend or that night, or maybe they were concentrating on the big football game or soccer game. So students begin to try to overanalyze situations and say, well, the reason I failed the test was because I was thinking about I got to get to my job after school, and my boss is going to be mad at me if I'm late again. And I really need the money to save up to buy a car or whatever. So students begin to, or teenagers, I should say, begin to. This is called rationalization. We're rationalizing why we're feeling the way why we feel the way we do, why we failed that test, why we had that car accident, whatever the case may be. Hopefully, you don't have a car accident, but certain things like that. And again, just like with children, when we talked about infants and children developing, not all teenagers will reach new cognitive skills at the same time. And these skills can also differ from social and cultural backgrounds. So, if you come from a wealthier family, maybe somebody comes from a little bit of a poorer family, the way you develop cognitively may be different from somebody who lives, 2 hours away from you. So changes in thinking patterns can also lead to changes in personality and social interactions. For example, teenagers can become very idealistic and hypothetical, so they see the world in grand schemes, and I can solve this or do that. They have a very hypothetical view of the world. Some begin to even view the world as a sorry place, so to speak, and they can rebel against it. So they might say, man, this world stinks, all these problems in the world, all these wars and destruction, all these diseases and, poor people. Sometimes they can rebel against that. They may want to try to change it. They may want to try to rebel against society. They blame society for some of the issues that are going on. They may rebel against society because of it. Others may develop a what is known as Messiah complex, where they believe that they can save the world. Oh my gosh, look at all these, children in, foreign countries or third world countries that are suffering. I can fix that. I know what I can do. I can save the world, and that's great and that's wonderful. But again, sometimes teenagers don't really think ahead too far before they make those assumptions. They can also become frustrated with older adult generations. They may blame older adults or older adult generations, such as their parents or grandparents or teachers, for the problems of the world, saying, how come you didn't fix this? How come you didn't help these people? And things like that. So they can become frustrated with people who are older than them and say, well, it's your fault. We don't, we have poor people in the world. It's your fault. We have, chemical weapons or nuclear weapons. It's not my fault. It's not my generation's fault. It's everyone else's fault who came before me. And they can also be very unrealistic about the complex nature of life. For example, certain job positions, like they don't understand why a person would give up the job when they're making a lot of money, just because they don't like the job. They don't understand. Teenagers typically don't understand it. Why would you give up a job you're unhappy at when you're making so much money? They don't understand those complex natures of life, of why adults feel certain ways. Now, the problems teenagers develop as a result of immaturity and kind of going through this abstract thought process were described by Dr. David Elkind in 1984. Some of the things that he identified were adolescents realized that the people that they admired for years have fallen short of their ideals and let others know it. So, for again, example, you admire your mom and your dad or your grandparents or siblings, whoever, somebody you look up to when you're a child, your teachers. Many kids look up to their teachers. But again, as they become teenagers and adolescents, they begin to realize that maybe their parents and their teachers or other adults in their life, again, going back to the whole concept or idea of, you failed the world. Why didn't you stop this? Why didn't we stop, these nuclear weapons? Why didn't you stop the spread of this disease? So they begin to, again, blame older generations for the problems of today. They also become very argumentative. Teenagers, and maybe some of you know friends or other family members, but teenagers are very argumentative, and they will argue any viewpoint for any problem that presents itself. I know my cousin, when she was a teenager, and even still growing up still, she can become very argumentative about certain hot topic political issues. When our family gets together, and she is very argumentative sometimes. She's not mean or violent, but she can become very argumentative, and that's part of her, cognitive process of growing up, as she, is still an older, well, she's in her early 20s now, but again, still that whole time period. Adolescents also have problems with decision making, even with limited choices. I can remember as a teenager, talking to my friends, hey guys, what do we want to do tonight? Do we want to go to the movies, or do we want to go to the bowling alley? You want to go grab a bite to eat at a restaurant? And those were just three simple choices, but it was like I'd be talking to 3 or 4 friends and nobody could make up their mind. It wasn't like I was saying, hey, let's go spend $1 million. What do we go spend it on? It was, hey, do we want to go to the movies, or do we want to go to the bowling alley? And sometimes even just 2 choices was just a difficult decision, and took a long time for us as teenagers to decide what we were going to do on a Friday or Saturday night. They also struggle with living up to an ideal, and they sometimes misunderstand it. So again, that whole Messiah complex of, I'm going to save the world, I'm going to stop cancer. That's great, but a lot of times teenagers, they don't really realize the full complexity behind it, and they sometimes misunderstand the ideal that they're trying to support. Adolescents assume that everyone is thinking the same thing they are. I'm sure you may have seen this again too with friends. That you get into arguments with your friends about different friends or different events or things like that, and even politics sometimes. They adolescents very much have a one-way thinking sometimes and think that everyone is thinking the same thing they are. And adolescents also feel that they are special and that their situation is unique, which is why teenagers take risky behaviors and self-destructive behaviors sometimes. This is why sometimes teenagers go to parties or whatever, and not saying that you should, but you probably hear in the news of teenagers doing things that are illegal and drugs and alcohol and things like that. But teenagers sometimes think that they are invincible. That's not going to happen to me. Yeah, that happened to that kid in the next school district, but that's not going to happen to me. I'm not going to make the same mistakes that that kid did. Well, and then unfortunately, the next weekend, that teenager is dead. So again, a lot of times teenagers, don't think that they, anything bad can happen to them with these risky behaviors that they take sometimes. So development of moral thinking. So adolescence and young adulthood are the most profound periods of moral thinking development. One of the things that they do is, remember we talked about Kohlberg about a week or so ago with moral thinking, moral development. And teenagers and adolescents begin to question if laws are just or unjust. Um, Abstract moral thinking also requires understanding another person's point of view, so you understand where another person is coming from. And not all adolescents display a higher level of this thinking. Again, just like with everything else, when we talk about development, not everybody develops at the same time or will develop these skills. Um, and one thing that psychologists typically agree on is that most moral development depends on certain factors, such as your relationship with your parents or a significant other. So understanding how your parents are feeling, understanding how your significant other is feeling, that allows for a higher development of moral thinking. And moral development does not progress as much in high school as it does in college, when you're, maybe living on your own and you have to make these important moral decisions. Is this right? Should I do this? Do I do this or that? And taking care of yourself when you're in college and when you live away. I know when I moved away to college and I lived away from home, it definitely made me mature a lot more about taking care of myself and being responsible for myself, doing my laundry. And many of you may do this on your own already. But again, when most teenagers move away or go to school or college, you begin to develop more of those moral skills about what is right and what is wrong. What do I need to do to improve myself? So we'll wrap up here. So cognitive and moral development, teenagers begin to develop abstract ways of thinking, again, not just in science and math, but just in everyday life, and they begin to understand the world around them. Again, sometimes their thinking is one way and one-sided, but again, that continues to progress. And moral development can also improve during adolescence, such as, are laws just or unjust, and understanding other people's points of view, and all those good things. All right, so please try your best on the questions, and I'll hopefully see and talk to you soon.